Down the road from Castel, there would be another battle that day. Two Jewish extremist organizations, Irgun and Lehi, which had fought the British, were eager to prove themselves in the new war.
It was such a tragedy. Deir Yassin was a lovely village.
The events at Deir Yassin would haunt relations between Jews and Arabs for years to come. Deir Yassin had stayed out of the fighting. It was not on the Haganah's list of hostile villages.
I ran into a man who had left us for the terrorists. He told me that the Irgun and Lehi had got permission from our commander to attack the village of Deir Yassin. He was very proud.
The Irgun and Lehi forces were ordered to take Deir Yassin.
I ran to my commander and asked, "Why did you allow it?" He said, "I suggested 2 other targets. They turned them down." He said, "I can't shoot them, can I?" So I decided to spy on them.
Their loudspeakers blared out, "Lay down your arms. Run for your lives." Then I heard our machine gun. I was kneeling down like this. When I looked up, I saw the village ablaze. Their attack lit up the whole village.
The village was not the soft target the Jews had expected. The commander ordered a house-to-house attack.
So I gave the order. Before entering a house, throw a couple of grenades inside.
They threw a grenade into one house. 28 were killed.
It was impossible to attack the enemy without hurting their families. It was difficult. It was painful, and I'm sorry we had to do it. But we had no choice.
After the battle, they took 14 prisoners. They lined them up by the quarry and mowed them down. They threw their bodies in the quarry. That's what happened.
While this was going on, Jews came from the next village. Most of them were religious, by the way. They started yelling, "Bastards! Murderers! What are you doing?" Some shouted in Hebrew, others in Yiddish. They stopped the massacre.
110 Arabs died in Deir Yassin. Some died fighting, others were murdered. In the next few months, over half the Arab population, 750,000 people, fled their homes in Palestine. Israel never allowed them back. The British did little to prevent the atrocities committed by both sides. As they prepared to leave, they washed their hands of the whole mess. At the United Nations, the Jews announced their plans.
Not later than May 16th next, a provisional Jewish government will commence to function in cooperation with the representatives of the United Nations then in Palestine.
The Jewish leadership sought political support abroad.
The U.S. State Department argued against it. Their first response was, "No country, no state."
Ben-Gurion sent his close colleague Moshe Sharet to convince the Americans to recognize the proposed Jewish state. Sharet tried to persuade Secretary of State George Marshall, who was totally opposed to the idea.
To peace and prosperity.
Charette explained that we have no other way than to proceed. This is a historic juncture. If we miss that, we may create a tragedy for future generations.
But President Truman surprised everyone with his strong support.
I was told by all these so-called experts that if it was done, it would involve the whole Near East in a war, and it would also involve the United States. Hitler had been murdering Jews right and left. I saw it, and I dream about it even to this day. The Jews needed some place where they could go. It was my attitude that the American government couldn't stand idly by while the victims of Hitler's madness were not allowed to build new lives.
Marshall was worried that war would break out.
We are in the midst of a very critical situation. We should therefore carefully avoid approaching international problems on an emotional basis.
He wanted to maintain good relations with the Arabs.
I was on the receiving end of Azam Pasha's impressions of his meeting with Marshall. And he was happy. I mean, he felt much more reassured about the Americans after having talked to Marshall than before. And we had the Saudis with us. They were our partners in this business.
2 days before the British left Palestine, Truman summoned Marshall to the White House. Clark Clifford was asked to support the case for a Jewish state.
General Marshall started off. The president listened attentively and then said, I would like now to hear from Clark. But as I spoke, I saw Marshall's face getting redder and redder. And when I finished, he exploded.
Marshall accused Truman of a transparent dodge to win the Jewish vote.
Clark Clifford did not disguise the fact that Marshall was raging mad. They don't need a state, they don't deserve a state, it isn't theirs. They've stolen that land. These were Marshall's words.
He turned to the president, said, I'm obliged, Mr. President, to tell you that if you should adopt the policy that is recommended by Clifford, I would be unable to vote for you in this coming election in November. Well, dead silence in the room. No one had ever heard anything like that. I had never heard anybody threaten the President of the United States in that manner.
Before Marshall could go any further, Truman ended the meeting.
I gathered my papers together, and the president said, well, that was tough as a cob.
Marshall said to Charette, well, it's your decision. Don't count that we can bail you out, but we know that you have reached an historic stage, and God protect you.
Eastward, the Arab Legion poised for invasion on the Transjordan border. The rarely photographed King Abdullah reviewed a brigade of reinforcements from Iraq.
Marshall's prediction of war was about to come true. 5 Arab states mobilized on the border, threatening to enter Palestine and crush a Jewish state, if it came into being.